Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. The iron shackles bit into Marlena's wrists as the auctioneer dragged her onto the platform in Fort Hollow's dusty market square. Her dress hung in tatters, her black hair matted with dried blood from where the ranch foreman had struck her 3 days earlier. The crowd of rough men and worn women whispered as she stumbled forward, chains rattling like thunder in the afternoon heat. They called her too fierce to love, the woman who'd scarred 5 men who tried to break her, the wildcat who'd rather die than submit. The sun blazed overhead, turning the wooden platform into a skillet, and Marlena lifted her chin despite the humiliation burning through her chest. She would not cry. She would not beg. She had survived worse than this auction block, and if death came today, she would meet it standing tall. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the square, listing her crimes like they were livestock features. She'd killed a man in self-defense 2 years ago when he'd cornered her in the barn at the Blackwood Ranch. She'd broken another man's jaw when he'd tried to force himself on her younger sister. She'd set fire to the foreman's cabin when he'd refused to pay the workers their wages. Every act of defiance had earned her new scars, new chains, new reasons for the territory to fear her name. The women in the crowd looked away, ashamed they couldn't be as brave. The men stared with a mixture of desire and terror, wanting to possess what they could never tame. Marlena's green eyes swept over them all with contempt. These were the people who'd stood silent while girls disappeared, while children starved, while the powerful crushed the weak. She hated them more than she hated her chains. Then the crowd parted like a river splitting around a stone. A Comanche warrior walked through the center of Fort Hollow's market square as if he owned every inch of dirt beneath his moccasins. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his chest bare except for a bone breastplate that gleamed white against his copper skin. War paint streaked his face in black and red, and his long dark hair fell past his shoulders, decorated with eagle feathers and leather cords. His name was Dakota, and the whispers that followed him were darker than any attached to Marlena. He'd burned 3 settlements to ash. He'd stolen horses from the cavalry and left their commander tied naked to a cactus. He'd never been captured, never been broken, and the bounty on his head could buy a small ranch. He walked straight toward the auction platform, and every eye followed him with naked fear. Dakota stopped at the base of the platform and stared up at Marlena with eyes black as midnight. She stared back, refusing to lower her gaze even though her heart hammered against her ribs. The auctioneer's voice died mid-sentence. The crowd held its breath. For 10 long seconds, the Comanche warrior and the shackled woman measured each other in absolute silence. Then Dakota reached into the leather pouch at his waist and pulled out a fistful of gold coins. Stolen cavalry pay by the look of them. He threw them at the auctioneer's feet with such force they scattered across the platform like seeds. His voice was deep and rough as stone grinding against stone. "I'll take her, and if any man here objects, I'll paint this square with his blood." No one objected. The auctioneer scrambled to unlock Marlena's shackles with shaking hands. The chains fell away, leaving raw red marks around her wrists that would scar. Dakota held out his hand, and for the first time in her life, Marlena hesitated. She'd fought men, killed men, defied men, but she'd never met one who looked at her like she was an equal instead of a problem to solve. His hand remained steady, palm up, waiting. Behind her lay Fort Hollow and its cruelty. Before her stood a man more dangerous than anyone she'd ever known. Marlena took his hand. The crowd gasped. Dakota pulled her down from the platform in one smooth motion, and together they walked through the parted crowd toward 2 horses waiting at the edge of the square. Neither looked back at the town that had tried to break her. 10 years earlier, Marlena had been a different person entirely. She'd been called Marley then, a skinny 12-year-old girl with wild black curls and a laugh that echoed through the valley where her family's small farm clung to life. Her father, Silas Coltrane, had been a quiet man with gentle hands, a former preacher who'd left the church to farm the hard land near the Cimarron River. Her mother, Adelaide, had died giving birth to Marlena's sister Verity when Marley was only 6. The two girls had grown up learning to shoot, plant, harvest, and survive with nothing but each other and their father's steady love. Those were the days before the drought, before the land turned to dust, before everything good in Marlena's life burned away like morning fog under a cruel sun. The drought came in the summer of Marlena's 13th year and stayed for 3 seasons like an unwelcome guest who wouldn't leave. The corn withered in the fields. The cattle died with their ribs showing through, hide stretched tight as drumskin. Silas sold everything they could spare, tools, furniture, Adelaide's wedding ring. But it wasn't enough. The bank in Fort Hollow held their land deed, and the banker, a pale worm of a man named Cornelius Redding, began visiting their farm every month with his foreman, a brute called Marcus Vex. They'd walk through the dying fields, shaking their heads, making notes in a leather book. Silas would stand on the porch with his shotgun across his lap, not threatening, but ready. Marlena and Verity would watch from the kitchen window, holding hands, sensing danger the way animals sense storms. One October evening, when the sunset painted the sky the color of blood, Marcus Vex came alone. Silas was in town trying to sell their last horse. Marlena was 14 then, tall for her age, with her mother's green eyes and her father's stubborn jaw. Verity was 8, small and sweet, hiding behind her sister's skirts when strangers came. Marcus Vex knocked on the door with his meaty fist, and when Marlena answered, his smile showed teeth yellow as old piano keys. He said he'd come to discuss payment arrangements. He said Mr. Redding was prepared to forgive some debt if the family was willing to be reasonable. His eyes crawled over Marlena like insects, and she knew exactly what kind of payment he meant. She told him to leave. He laughed and stepped inside. That was his first mistake. Marlena had her father's old hunting knife in her apron pocket. She always carried it when Silas was gone. When Marcus Vex reached for her, she pulled the blade and slashed his hand so deep she saw white bone. He roared and backhanded her so hard she flew across the room and crashed into the table. Verity screamed. Blood poured from Vex's hand and rage turned his face purple. He came at Marlena again, and this time she didn't hesitate. She drove the knife into his thigh and twisted. He went down howling. She grabbed Verity and ran out the back door, into the fields, into the darkness. They hid in the root cellar until Silas came home and found Marcus Vex bleeding on their kitchen floor. The foreman survived, but everything else died that night. The bank foreclosed. The sheriff called it assault. Silas lost the farm trying to keep Marlena out of jail. They moved to Fort Hollow and lived in a one-room shack behind the livery stable. Silas took work as a stable hand for pennies. Marlena worked in the laundry, scrubbing other people's clothes until her hands cracked and bled. Verity helped where she could, but she was fragile, prone to coughing fits that left her gasping. The years passed like a slow death. Marlena grew harder with each passing season, her laughter dying, her heart turning to stone. Men came at her with hands and words and promises, and she fought them all. She earned her reputation one scar at a time, one broken bone at a time, one man at a time. They called her too fierce to love, and she wore the name like armor. But armor gets heavy. And some nights, alone in the dark, Marlena wondered if she'd ever feel anything but rage again. Dakota rode ahead on his paint stallion, while Marlena followed on the smaller mare he had given her. They traveled east from Fort Hollow, away from civilization, toward the broken lands where mesas rose like ancient teeth from the desert floor. The sun climbed higher, turning the air into liquid heat. Marlena's throat burned with thirst, but she didn't ask for water. She watched the Comanche's broad back, the way he sat his horse, like they were one creature, the way his head turned slightly every few minutes to check she was still following. He hadn't spoken since they left town. Neither had she. The silence between them felt different from the silence of her chains. This one held possibility instead of defeat. Her wrists still ached where the shackles had been, and she rubbed them absently, feeling the ghost of iron that might never leave her. After 3 hours of riding, Dakota finally stopped at a rocky outcrop where a thin stream trickled from between stones. He dismounted in one fluid motion and held out a leather water skin to Marlena without looking at her. She took it and drank deeply, the cool water shocking after the desert heat. When she lowered the skin, she found him watching her with those midnight eyes. "You didn't ask why I bought you," he said. His English was perfect, barely touched by accent. Marlena wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Figured you'd tell me when you were ready, or not at all." Dakota's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "They say you're too fierce to love, too wild to tame. They say you've killed men and burned buildings and broken bones." Marlena met his gaze steadily. "All true. You want to add your name to the list of men who tried to break me?" Dakota shook his head slowly. "I don't want to break you. I want to set you free." The words hung in the desert air like heat shimmer. Marlena frowned, suspicion rising in her chest. "Nobody buys a woman at auction to set her free. What's your real reason?" The Comanche warrior was quiet for a long moment, staring past her toward the horizon. When he spoke again, his voice carried weight like stones dropping into deep water. "My sister was taken 6 years ago by white men from Fort Hollow. Her name was Ayana. She was 16. They took her from our camp while our warriors were hunting. When we found her 3 days later, she was dead, beaten, used, thrown in a ditch like garbage." His jaw clenched, muscles jumping. "I've killed 12 men since then. Every one of them was involved. But I still haven't found the man who led them, the one who gave the orders." Marlena felt something crack in her chest. She knew that kind of grief. She'd carried it herself since the night her father died in a bar fight, defending Verity from drunk soldiers. A fight he'd lost because 5 men had held him down while a 6th beat him to death. "And you think I can help you find him?" she asked quietly. Dakota turned to face her fully. "I think you know Fort Hollow's secrets. I think you've seen things, heard things. Notice who has power and who's afraid. I think you're smart enough to survive what should have killed you a dozen times. And I think—" He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his face. "I think you understand what it means to want justice so badly you'd burn the whole world down to get it. I've watched you for 3 months. Marlena Coltrane. I know who you are. I know what you've survived. And I know you're the only person fierce enough to help me finish this." The revelation hit Marlena like cold water. He'd been watching her, studying her, waiting for the right moment. The auction hadn't been chance. It had been a plan. She should have felt manipulated, used, angry. Instead, she felt something else entirely. Seen. For the first time since her mother died, someone looked at her and saw not a problem or a threat or a challenge, but a person with purpose and power. Dakota had bought her freedom not because he wanted to own her, but because he needed an ally, and he'd chosen her because he recognized her strength. "Who is he?" Marlena asked, her voice steady despite the fire building in her chest. "Who led the men who took your sister?" Dakota's eyes hardened to black ice. "His name is Marcus Vex. He's the foreman at Cornelius Redding's ranch, and he's the same man you cut 10 years ago when he came for you in your father's house." Marlena's world tilted. Marcus Vex. The name burned in her mind like a brand. The man who'd destroyed her family's farm. The man who'd set in motion every terrible thing that followed. The man who'd smiled his yellow smile and reached for her with hands that had already hurt so many others. Suddenly, everything made sense. Why Vex had always looked at her with special hatred. Why he'd been the one to drag her to the auction block. Why he'd whispered that he'd finally get to watch her broken and sold like livestock. He'd been finishing what he started 10 years ago. Marlena's hands curled into fists. "When do we ride?" she asked. Dakota's expression shifted into something fierce and satisfied. Tomorrow, tonight, we plan. And when we're done, Marcus Vex will pay for every girl he's hurt, every family he's destroyed, every life he's stolen. Justice is coming for him, Marlena, and we're going to deliver it together. They made camp in a canyon where red rock walls rose 100 feet on either side, creating a natural fortress hidden from the desert floor. Dakota built a small fire while Marlena tended to the horses, working in companionable silence that felt strange after years of hostile attention from men. The stars emerged one by one, filling the sky with cold light. Marlena sat across the fire from the Comanche warrior and accepted the dried meat he offered, chewing slowly while her mind raced through everything she knew about Marcus Vex's movements, habits, and weaknesses. The man was cruel, but not clever. He relied on size and violence to solve problems. That would be his downfall. Dakota watched her think, patient as stone, waiting for her to speak first. She appreciated that. Another man would have filled the silence with demands or questions or attempts to establish dominance. Vex goes to the Golden Mare Saloon every Friday night, Marlena said finally. He drinks until midnight, plays cards until he loses his week's pay, then staggers to the boarding house on Willow Street. He's usually alone by 1 a.m. That's when he's vulnerable. Dakota nodded, firelight dancing across his painted face. What about guards? Does Redding protect him? Marlena shook her head. Redding's a coward. He lets Vex do his dirty work but doesn't want to be connected to it. Vex has no real friends, just men who fear him. Once he's away from the ranch, he's on his own. She paused, remembering something that made her stomach turn. But there's something else. Vex has been taking girls from the town. Young ones, mostly Mexican or Comanche, girls nobody will miss or fight for. He keeps them at an old line shack about 5 miles northeast of Redding's main ranch. I heard whispers about it from other women at the laundry. Nobody talks about it openly because everyone's afraid. Dakota's expression went dark and dangerous. How many girls? His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of mountains. Marlena met his eyes across the fire. I don't know. Maybe 3 or 4 at any time. He uses them, then sells them to traders heading to Mexico, or they disappear completely. I think... She stopped, her throat tight. I think that's what he did with your sister. I think Ayana was never meant to survive. She was merchandise to him, just like all of us. The fire crackled. A nightbird called from somewhere high on the canyon wall. Dakota's hands curled and uncurled, the only sign of the fury building inside him. When he spoke again, his voice was ice over deep water. Then we don't just kill him. We free the girls first. We make sure everyone in Fort Hollow knows exactly what Marcus Vex was, and then we make him answer for everything. Marlena felt something shift in her chest, a door opening that had been locked for years. This wasn't just revenge. This was rescue. This was protection for girls who had no one to stand between them and monsters. This was the kind of justice her father would have approved of, the kind her mother would have fought for if she'd lived. I'm with you, Marlena said quietly. Whatever it takes, but I need to know something first. She leaned forward, firelight catching in her green eyes. Why me? You could have found other people who know Fort Hollow. Why buy me off that auction block? Why trust me? Dakota was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. When he finally looked up, his expression was raw and honest. Because when I watched you stand on that platform in chains, bloody and beaten, you didn't beg. You didn't cry. You stood there like a queen looking down on peasants. And I thought, this is someone who understands. This is someone who's been through fire and came out steel. I'm not steel, Marlena said softly. I'm broken glass held together with rage. Some days I feel like I'm going to shatter into pieces so small nobody could ever put me back together. The admission surprised her. She'd never said those words out loud before. Dakota nodded slowly. I know. I feel the same way. Every day since Ayana died, I've been holding myself together with nothing but the promise of making Vex pay. Some mornings I wake up and don't know why I'm still alive. Then I remember, I'm alive because my sister can't be. I'm alive to make sure no other sister suffers like she did. Purpose is the only thing keeping me whole. He paused, then added quietly, maybe we're both broken, but broken things can still be sharp, and sharp things can cut through anything if they're aimed right. Marlena felt tears prick her eyes for the first time in years. She blinked them away furiously, angry at herself for showing weakness. But when she looked across the fire, Dakota wasn't judging her. He was watching with understanding, with respect, with something that might have been recognition. Two broken people seeing each other clearly for the first time. Tomorrow we start planning the details, Marlena said, her voice rough. We'll need supplies, weapons, maybe one or two people we can trust. I know a woman named Rosa who works in Redding's kitchen. She hates Vex as much as we do. And there's a stable boy called Jimmy, who saw things he shouldn't have. Vex threatened to kill him if he talked, but Jimmy might help if we promised to get him out of Fort Hollow afterward. Dakota nodded. Good. We move carefully. We plan perfectly. And when we strike so hard, they'll never forget what happens to men who hurt the innocent. They talked late into the night, two warriors forging an alliance in firelight and shared pain. 3 days later, Marlena and Dakota rode back toward Fort Hollow under cover of darkness, approaching from the east where the landscape turned to broken hills and twisted juniper trees. They'd spent the intervening time gathering information through Dakota's contacts, other Comanche scouts who moved through the territory like ghosts, trading information for goods. The news they'd learned made Marlena's blood run cold. Marcus Vex had 4 girls at the line shack right now, the youngest barely 13. A trader from Chihuahua was coming in 6 days to buy them. If Marlena and Dakota didn't act fast, those girls would disappear into Mexico and never be seen again. The weight of that knowledge sat heavy on Marlena's shoulders as they picketed their horses in a ravine and moved forward on foot toward the edge of town. Every minute counted now. Every decision mattered. Failure wasn't an option. Marlena led Dakota through the back alleys of Fort Hollow like she'd been born in them. She knew every shadow, every loose board, every dog that barked, and everyone that stayed quiet. They moved silently through the darkness until they reached the back entrance of the Golden Mare Saloon. Marlena knocked 3 times, paused, then twice more, a signal she'd arranged years ago with Rosa, the kitchen woman who'd been kind to her when kindness was rare. The door opened a crack, and Rosa's weathered face peered out. Her eyes widened when she saw Marlena. Madre de Dios, girl, they said you were sold at auction 3 days ago. How are you here? Marlena kept her voice low. I need your help, Rosa, and I don't have much time to explain. Can we come in? Rosa glanced at Dakota, taking in his war paint and weapons, then nodded and pulled the door wide. Quickly, Vex is upstairs losing at cards. He'll be down in an hour. Inside the hot kitchen that smelled of grease and whiskey, Marlena explained their plan in quick, quiet sentences. Rosa's expression shifted from shock to fierce satisfaction. I knew that devil was doing something evil. I knew it. My niece disappeared last year. Pretty girl, only 15. Everyone said she ran away, but I knew better. I always knew better. Her hands shook as she gripped the edge of the table. What do you need from me? Marlena glanced at Dakota, who nodded. We need to know Vex's exact routine. When he leaves, where he goes, if he ever goes to the line shack alone, and we need to know if Redding is involved or if it's just Vex. Rosa thought for a moment. Redding knows something's happening, but he pretends he doesn't. He's too much of a coward to get his hands dirty. It's all Vex. Vex and maybe 2 other men who work the line shack in shifts. One of them is called Dutch, big man with a scar on his neck. The other is younger, goes by Sam. They're both mean, but they're not smart. Dakota spoke for the first time, his voice soft but dangerous. Can you get a message to the stable boy, Jimmy? Tell him to meet us at the old mission ruins south of town tomorrow at dawn. Tell him we're going to end Marcus Vex, and we need his eyes on the inside." Rosa nodded quickly. "I'll get word to him tonight. Jimmy's a good boy. He'll help. He's been having nightmares about what he saw." She turned to Marlena and gripped her hands tight. "Be careful, Mia. Vex is a monster, but he's a monster who knows how to survive. He's slippery and cruel. If you're not careful, he'll kill you both and add your bodies to all the others nobody talks about." Marlena squeezed Rosa's hands in return. "Then we'll make sure we're more careful than he expects. And when this is over, Fort Hollow is going to know exactly what kind of monster they've been protecting." She paused, then added softly, "Thank you, Rosa, for being kind when nobody else was. I won't forget it." They left through the back door and melted into the shadows just as heavy footsteps thumped down the stairs inside the saloon. Marlena's heart hammered as they moved away from the light and noise, back into the safety of darkness. Behind them, Marcus Vex's voice boomed through the saloon, demanding another drink, bragging about some woman he'd broken. The sound of his voice made Marlena's skin crawl. Dakota touched her elbow gently, guiding her forward. "Soon," he murmured. "Very soon he'll never hurt anyone again." They made their way back to their hidden camp, moving like shadows through a town that had tried to destroy them both. The moon rose higher, casting silver light across the desert. Somewhere out there, 4 girls waited in chains, hoping someone would save them. Marlena and Dakota were that someone, and tomorrow, the real work would begin. Back in their canyon camp, Marlena couldn't sleep. She lay on her bedroll, staring at the stars while memories crashed through her mind like waves. She remembered her father's funeral, how only she and Verity and Rosa had attended, because everyone else was afraid of angering the powerful men who'd killed him. She remembered holding her baby sister while Verity coughed blood into a rag, the consumption eating her alive while Marlena worked herself to exhaustion, trying to pay for medicine they couldn't afford. She remembered the day Verity died, age 14, whispering that she was sorry for being a burden, and how Marlena had screamed until her voice gave out because her sister's last words had been an apology for existing. That was when something inside Marlena had finally broken completely. She'd become fierce, not because she was strong, but because she had nothing left to lose. Too fierce to love wasn't armor. It was a tombstone for the girl she used to be. "You're thinking too loud," Dakota said from his bedroll across the dying fire. Marlena turned her head to look at him. "Can't help it. Too many ghosts." He was quiet for a moment. "Tell me about your sister." So Marlena did. She told him about Verity's gentle laugh, her love of wildflowers, the way she'd hum while working even when she was tired and sick. She told him how Verity had been the soft one, the kind one, the one who still believed people were basically good. She told him how protecting Verity had been the only thing that mattered for years, and how losing her had been like losing the last piece of herself that could still feel hope. When she finished, her cheeks were wet with tears she didn't remember crying. Dakota didn't tell her it would be okay. He didn't offer empty comfort. He just said, "She would be proud of what you're doing, saving those girls, making Vex pay. That's the kind of thing worth living for." And somehow, that was exactly what Marlena needed to hear. Dawn broke cold and pink over the mission ruins, painting the crumbling adobe walls the color of old blood. Marlena and Dakota arrived first, their horses tied in the shadow of the collapsed bell tower. The mission had been abandoned for 30 years, ever since cholera swept through and killed the priests and most of the converts who'd lived there. Now it was a ghost place, avoided by locals who claimed they could still hear the death bells ringing on quiet nights. Marlena had always liked it here. The silence felt respectful rather than threatening, and the empty spaces reminded her that nothing lasts forever, not even pain. She sat on a broken wall while Dakota scouted the perimeter, making sure they were truly alone. The morning air smelled of sage and dust. Somewhere in the ruins, a mourning dove called its 3-note song. Marlena closed her eyes and let herself feel the moment. Soon everything would change. Soon blood would be spilled. But right now, in this quiet hour, she could breathe. Jimmy arrived exactly at dawn, riding a sway-backed mule that looked as tired as he did. The stable boy was 17 but looked 40, his face lined with worry and his shoulders permanently hunched like he expected a blow from behind. When he saw Marlena, relief flooded his expression. "Thank God. Rosa said you were alive, but I didn't believe it. Everyone's saying you were bought by a savage who's going to ransom you back to Fort Hollow for gold." He slid off the mule, then noticed Dakota standing in the tower shadow and went very still. "It's all right," Marlena said quickly. "He's with me. We're working together." She gestured for Jimmy to sit. "We need to know everything you've seen at the line shack, and I need you to understand. If you help us, you'll have to leave Fort Hollow afterward. Redding and Vex won't forgive you, but we'll make sure you get out safe and have enough money to start somewhere new." Jimmy's hands shook as he sat. "I don't care about the money. I care about stopping what's happening. I've seen—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I've seen things that make me sick. Girls younger than my sister, crying and begging. Vex laughing about it. Dutch hitting them when they try to fight. And Redding knows. I saw him ride out to the line shack once and go inside. When he came out, he looked ashamed. But he still paid Vex extra that month. They're all guilty. Every single one of them." His voice cracked. "I wanted to do something, but I'm nobody. A stable boy. Who'd listen to me? Who'd believe me over men with money and guns?" Dakota moved closer, his shadow falling across Jimmy. "We believe you, and we're going to make sure everyone believes you. But first, we need details. How many men guard the line shack? What's the schedule? When do they change shifts?" Jimmy took a shaky breath and began talking. He'd been making supply runs to the line shack for 8 months, delivering food and water under the guise of checking on ranch equipment stored there. The shack sat in a narrow valley, 5 miles northeast of the main ranch, hidden by rock formations that made it invisible from the main trail. 2 men were always there. Dutch and Sam worked in shifts, one sleeping while the other watched the girls who were kept in the root cellar beneath the shack. Vex came every few days to check on his merchandise and select which girl a trader would see first when he arrived. The Mexican trader, whose name was Calderon, was due in 4 days. He'd arrive with gold and wagons, buy the girls like livestock, and disappear south before anyone could track him. It was a system Vex had perfected over 5 years. Isolated location, rotating guards, buyers from outside the territory. No witnesses, no loose ends. Almost perfect. "Almost," Marlena said quietly. "But he made one mistake. He didn't count on someone like us coming after him." She turned to Dakota. "We hit the line shack first. Free the girls, deal with Dutch and Sam. Then we use the girls' testimony to turn the town against Vex and Redding. Without the girls as evidence, it's our word against theirs. But with 4 living witnesses and a cellar full of chains, even Fort Hollow can't ignore the truth." Dakota nodded slowly. "It's a good plan, but dangerous. Dutch and Sam will fight to the death because they know they'll hang if they're caught. And if we fail, if even one of them escapes to warn Vex, he'll disappear and we'll never find him again." He looked at Jimmy. "Can you get word to Rosa? Tell her that 3 days from now, she needs to gather every woman in Fort Hollow who's lost a daughter or sister to Vex's operation. Tell her to bring them to the sheriff's office at noon. We'll have the proof they need by then." Jimmy nodded, his face pale but determined. "I can do that. Rosa knows which women to trust. There are more than you'd think. Maybe 20 families who've lost girls in the past 5 years. If they all speak up together, the sheriff will have to listen. He's a coward, but he's not stupid. He knows which way the wind blows." He stood up, looking between Marlena and Dakota. "Thank you for doing this, for giving a damn when nobody else would. If you need anything else, weapons, horses, supplies, I'll get it. Just tell me what you need." Marlena stood and gripped his shoulder. "You're braver than you think, Jimmy. When this is over, you're going to have a future somewhere far from here. Somewhere you can sleep without nightmares. I promise you that. Jimmy's eyes glistened with unshed tears. He nodded once, then mounted his mule and rode back toward Fort Hollow without looking back. Marlena and Dakota spent the rest of the day preparing. They checked their weapons, Dakota's rifle and bow, Marlena's knife, and the revolver Dakota had given her. They went over the plan again and again, anticipating problems and solutions. They discussed what they'd do if the girls were too traumatized to travel, if Dutch and Sam proved harder to subdue than expected, if Vex showed up unexpectedly. Every scenario was examined and planned for. As the sun began to set, painting the ruins gold and crimson, Marlena felt a strange calm settle over her. For the first time in years, she wasn't fighting just for survival or revenge. She was fighting for something bigger, for justice, for protection, for the hope that maybe the world could be slightly less terrible if good people were willing to do hard things. She glanced at Dakota and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked. He smiled, just a little. "You're different than when I first saw you on that auction block. Lighter somehow." Marlena considered that. Maybe he was right. Maybe purpose was the antidote to despair. Maybe having something to fight for made the weight of everything she'd survived a little easier to carry. She smiled back. "So are you." Tomorrow, they'd ride to the line shack and begin the end of Marcus Vex. But tonight, they sat together in the ruins and watched the stars emerge, two broken warriors finding strength in each other's company. They approached the line shack at midnight when the moon was high and the desert turned silver. Dakota moved like smoke through the darkness, absolutely silent despite his size. Marlena followed close behind, her heart steady and her hands sure. They'd left their horses a mile back and covered the rest on foot, using every rock and shadow for concealment. The line shack appeared exactly as Jimmy had described, a weathered wood structure that leaned slightly to the left, surrounded by scrub brush and boulders. A single lantern burned in the window. Outside, two horses were tied to a post, dozing on three legs. No guards visible, which meant they were both inside or one was in the root cellar with the girls. Dakota touched Marlena's arm and pointed to himself, then to the front door. He pointed to her, then to the back. She nodded, understanding. They'd go in from both sides simultaneously, giving the men no time to react or hurt the prisoners. Marlena circled wide through the darkness until she reached the back of the shack. The door was old wood with rusty hinges. She tested it gently, unlocked. Of course. Who'd expect anyone to find this place, let alone attack it? She pressed her ear to the gap and heard voices inside. Male laughter. The sound made her stomach turn. She counted to 10 slowly, giving Dakota time to get into position, then pulled her revolver and checked the cylinder one more time. 6 shots. She wouldn't miss. At the front of the shack, she heard Dakota's boot hit the door, the wood splintering with a crack like thunder. Marlena kicked in the back door at the same moment and rushed inside, gun raised. The room was small and filthy, lit by the single lantern hanging from a beam. Dutch sat at a table with cards spread in front of him, a massive man with a scar running from ear to jaw. Sam was younger, leaner, halfway to standing when Dakota came through the front with his rifle leveled. Both men froze. "Hands up," Marlena said, her voice cold as winter stone. "Move, and you're dead." Dutch's eyes flicked between her and Dakota, calculating odds. His hand twitched toward the pistol on the table. "Don't," Dakota warned. "I can put a bullet through your eye before you touch it." But Dutch was either stupid or desperate. His hand darted for the gun. Dakota's rifle cracked. The bullet took Dutch in the shoulder, spinning him backward. He crashed into the wall with a scream. Sam raised his hands immediately, terror washing his face white. "Don't shoot. Please don't shoot. I didn't want to do this. Vex made me." Marlena kept her gun trained on him. "Where are the girls?" Sam pointed, with a shaking finger to a trapdoor in the corner, half hidden under a filthy rug. "Down there. In the cellar. They're alive. I swear we didn't hurt them today. We were just watching them. Marlena's finger tightened on the trigger. Just watching. As if that made it better. As if being a passive participant in horror was somehow forgivable. She wanted to shoot him. Every fiber of her being screamed for his blood. But killing him now would make her the villain in whatever story came later. She needed him alive to testify. Dakota, tie them both. Use the chains from that wall. She gestured to the shackles hanging on iron hooks, the same kind that had held her 3 days ago. The irony wasn't lost on her. Dakota moved efficiently, binding Dutch and Sam to the heavy support beam in the center of the room. Dutch groaned and cursed, blood soaking his shirt. Sam cried, promising to tell them everything, begging for mercy he'd never shown the girls in that cellar. When they were secure, Marlena holstered her gun and moved to the trapdoor. Her hands shook as she pulled it open. The smell that rose from below made her gag. Unwashed bodies, fear, sweat, and despair. The wooden ladder descended into absolute darkness. Marlena grabbed the lantern and climbed down carefully, her heart breaking with every step. At the bottom, she raised the light. 4 pairs of eyes stared at her from the shadows. 4 girls chained to the wall by their ankles, dressed in rags, thin as starved dogs. The youngest looked about 13, eyes huge in her gaunt face. The oldest might have been 16. They flinched away from the light, trained by weeks or months of abuse to expect pain. Marlena set the lantern down carefully and raised her empty hands. I'm not here to hurt you. My name is Marlena. I'm here to take you home. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the oldest girl began to cry. Not the silent tears of the defeated, but huge, heaving sobs of relief. You're real, she whispered. I thought you were another dream. I thought nobody was coming. Marlena's vision blurred. I'm real, and I'm getting you out of here right now. Dakota climbed down with the keys he'd taken from Sam's pocket. Together, they unlocked each girl's chains, catching them when they stumbled on legs weak from disuse. Marlena wrapped them in blankets from the shack, murmuring reassurance in English and what little Spanish she knew. The girls clung to her and to each other, crying and shaking. One of them, a Mexican girl with long black hair, kept repeating, "Gracias a Dios," over and over like a prayer. Another, younger, with Comanche features, stared at Dakota with recognition. You're the warrior, she whispered. The one they say can't be caught. My grandfather told stories about you. Dakota knelt before her, his fierce face gentle. What's your name, little sister? The girl swallowed. Mika. My village is 3 days north. I was taken 4 weeks ago when I went to the river alone. Dakota's jaw clenched. We're taking you home, Mika. You and all your sisters here. I promise you that. Getting the girls out of the cellar and onto horses took time. They were weak, frightened, flinching at every sound. Marlena worked with patient determination, helping each one up the ladder, giving them water and dried meat, speaking softly. By the time they had all 4 girls settled on the horses Dakota had brought from the ravine, dawn was beginning to paint the eastern sky. They had been at the line shack for 2 hours. Marlena knew they needed to move. Someone might come, and they couldn't fight and protect 4 traumatized girls simultaneously. But before they left, she went back inside, where Dutch and Sam remained chained. She stood in front of them, her face hard as desert stone. When the sheriff comes, you're going to tell him everything, every name, every detail, every girl you helped steal. You're going to testify against Vex and Redding and anyone else involved. If you don't, she leaned close. If you don't, I'll come back. And next time, Dakota won't stop me from pulling this trigger. Understand? Both men nodded frantically. Marlena turned and walked out into the dawn. Behind her, she heard Sam whimpering. She didn't look back. They brought the 4 girls to the old mission ruins where Rosa was waiting with food, clean clothes, and a wagon. The kitchen woman had brought 2 other women with her, mothers who'd lost daughters to Vex's operation, whose faces showed the permanent grief of never knowing what happened to their children. When they saw the 4 girls alive, they wept and prayed and embraced the survivors like they were their own lost daughters. Marlena watched from a distance, feeling something crack and heal simultaneously in her chest. This was what victory looked like. Not revenge, not violence, but broken people being put back together through kindness and witness. Rose approached Marlena with tears streaming down her weathered face. "You did it. Madre de Dios. You actually did it." She gripped Marlena's hands. "Those girls would have been gone in 2 days. Disappeared forever. You saved them." Marlena shook her head. "We saved them. You, me, Dakota, Jimmy. All of us together. One person can't fight this alone." The girls were fed and cleaned and wrapped in blankets. The oldest one, whose name was Carmen, told her story in a steady voice despite the tears on her cheeks. She'd been taken from outside her family's farm 6 weeks ago. Dutch had held her while Sam put the sack over her head. She'd screamed until her throat bled, but nobody came. At the line shack, Vex had visited 3 times. He'd looked at her like she was merchandise, discussing her features and value with Calderon the trader like she was a horse or a piece of furniture. She'd heard him talk about other girls he'd sold, dozens over the years. Some went to Mexico, some went to brothels in California. Some just disappeared and nobody knew where. Carmen's voice never wavered as she spoke, and Marlena understood why. Bearing witness was its own kind of power. Telling the truth was how you took that power back from the people who tried to steal it. By mid-morning, Jimmy had spread word through Fort Hollow. 23 women gathered at the mission ruins, mothers, sisters, aunts who'd lost girls to Vex's operation. They came with stories that matched Carmen's, daughters who'd vanished from the market, sisters who'd never come home from work, nieces who'd been seen talking to Dutch or Sam and then disappeared overnight. For years, these women had whispered among themselves, afraid to speak loudly because Vex had the power of Redding's money behind him, and Redding had the sheriff in his pocket. But now, standing together with 4 living witnesses, their whispers became a roar. Rosa organized them like a general commanding troops. "We march to the sheriff's office at noon. We bring the girls. We demand justice. And if the sheriff refuses, we go to the territorial marshal. This ends today." The women nodded, their faces set with determination that had been building for years. Dakota pulled Marlena aside while the women organized. "We still need Vex. The girls' testimony will put Dutch and Sam away, maybe even implicate Redding. But Vex is the architect. He's the one who built the system. If he runs before we get him, he'll just set up somewhere else and start again." Marlena knew he was right. Marcus Vex was the beating heart of this evil. Cut off the head and the body dies. He'll be at the Golden Mare tonight. He always is on Fridays. He doesn't know we've hit the line shack yet. Dutch and Sam can't warn him, and they weren't supposed to check in until tomorrow. We have today to set the trap. She thought for a moment. What if we use the girl's testimony to get the sheriff on our side first? If the law is with us, taking down Vex becomes legitimate justice instead of vigilante revenge. It's cleaner, and it means we don't hang for what we're about to do. They spent the afternoon preparing. Rosa coached the girls on what to say, how to stay calm, how to tell their stories clearly despite the trauma. Jimmy brought the sheriff, a tired-looking man named Blackwood, who'd been in Redding's pocket for so long, he'd almost forgotten he was supposed to serve justice instead of money. But when he saw 4 living girls and heard their testimony, something shifted in his face. Maybe shame, maybe belated conscience, maybe just the realization that this was too big to cover up. "I'll need statements from each girl," he said quietly. "And I'll need to arrest Dutch and Sam at the line shack. If their testimony matches what these girls are saying." He paused. "Then I'll have probable cause to bring in Vex and Redding for questioning. And if I'm being honest, I should have done this years ago. I didn't want to believe it was happening. Didn't want to see it." He looked at Marlena. "I'm sorry. For not protecting you and every other woman in this town. I'm sorry." Marlena didn't forgive him. She just nodded. Apologies were fine, but action mattered more. Vex will be at the Golden Mare tonight. If you're going to arrest him, do it then. When he's drunk and off guard, bring deputies. Don't go alone. He's dangerous and he'll fight. Blackwood nodded. I'll bring 6 men, good men who aren't on Redding's payroll, and I'll send a telegram to the territorial marshal. This is bigger than Fort Hollow. This is federal trafficking. Vex is going to hang for this. He left to organize his deputies. The women began preparing to march through Fort Hollow with the rescued girls, making sure everyone saw the evidence, heard the testimony, understood what had been happening in their town, while they looked away. Dakota stood beside Marlena, watching the preparations. You did good, he said quietly. Your father would be proud. Your sister would be proud. Marlena felt tears prick her eyes again. I just wish they were here to see it. I wish Verity could know that the man who destroyed our family is finally going to pay. Dakota put his hand on her shoulder, the first time he'd voluntarily touched her with gentleness instead of necessity. She knows. Wherever she is, she knows. And somehow, Marlena believed him. At noon, the women of Fort Hollow marched through the main street with 4 rescued girls at the center, Rosa and Marlena leading the way. The town stopped. Shopkeepers came out of their stores. Men froze on the boardwalks. Children stared from doorways. The silence was absolute as Carmen told her story in the middle of the street, her voice carrying in the still air. She named names. She described locations. She detailed exactly what Vex, Dutch and Sam had done to her and the other girls. Other women stepped forward, adding their lost daughters' names to the testimony. 23 families. 23 stolen girls over 5 years. Only 4 survivors standing in the street. The mathematics of evil laid bare for everyone to see. By the time Carmen finished, several men in the crowd had tears running down their faces. Women held each other and wept. The town had known. Deep down, everyone had known. But knowing and seeing were different things, and now they couldn't look away. Night fell on Fort Hollow like a judgment. The Golden Mare saloon blazed with lamplight and the sound of piano music, but the usual rowdy atmosphere was muted. Everyone had heard about the testimony in the street. Everyone knew the sheriff had ridden out to the line shack with deputies and come back with Dutch and Sam in chains. Everyone knew Marcus Vex was inside the saloon, drinking alone at his usual table, either unaware of the storm coming or too arrogant to care. Marlena stood in the shadows across the street with Dakota, watching the saloon doors. Her hands were steady. Her heart was calm. This was the moment everything had built toward. Years of pain, months of planning, days of action. Marcus Vex had destroyed her family, stolen her childhood, and hurt countless girls. Tonight, he'd answer for all of it. Sheriff Blackwood and 6 deputies gathered at the end of the street. They'd given Marlena and Dakota 10 minutes to get into position before they moved in. It was more consideration than she'd expected from a lawman, but Blackwood seemed genuinely ashamed of his years of inaction. Redemption was better late than never. Marlena and Dakota entered through the kitchen, Rosa letting them in with a tight nod. They moved through the back hallway toward the main room. Through the doorway, Marlena could see Vex at his table, still massive, still mean-looking, his yellow smile visible even from a distance as he joked with the bartender. He had no idea his world was about to end. Marlena felt a cold satisfaction settle over her. This was justice, not revenge. Justice. There was a difference. Revenge was hot and impulsive. Justice was cold and certain. She'd learned that difference over the past few days with Dakota. They stepped into the main room together. The piano player's hands stuttered to a stop. Conversation died like a candle snuffed. Every eye turned to the Comanche warrior and the woman they'd called too fierce to love. Marcus Vex looked up from his cards. For 1 second, his face showed confusion, then recognition, then fear. He stood so fast his chair crashed backward. You! He snarled at Marlena. You're supposed to be gone. Sold. How are you? He saw Dakota and his voice died. Hello, Marcus, Marlena said, her voice carrying in the silent room. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. Vex's hand dropped to the gun at his hip. Don't, Dakota warned, his rifle appearing like magic in his hands. You're done, Vex. The line shack has been raided. Dutch and Sam are in jail. 4 girls are alive and telling everyone exactly what you did to them. And right now, Sheriff Blackwood is outside with 6 deputies ready to put you in chains. You can come quietly, or you can die here. Either way works for me. The color drained from Vex's face. His eyes darted to the doors, the windows, looking for escape. There was none. The other men in the saloon had backed away, creating a circle of empty space around him. Nobody wanted to be associated with him now. Nobody wanted to be caught defending the indefensible. Marcus Vex had been powerful when he had Redding's money and the law's willful blindness protecting him. Stripped of both, he was just a cruel man facing consequences. You can't prove anything, Vex said, but his voice shook. It's my word against some girls nobody will believe, against a savage and a woman everyone knows is crazy. Marlena smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Is that what you think? That nobody will believe us? Marcus, there are 23 families outside who've been waiting years for someone to believe them. There are 4 girls ready to testify in territorial court. There are 2 men in jail right now giving statements to save their own necks, and both of them are naming you as the architect. And there's me. She took a step closer. I'm the girl you tried to rape when I was 14. The girl whose father you got killed because he defended me. The girl you dragged to an auction block and sold like livestock. I remember everything, Marcus. Every word, every touch, every crime. And I'm going to tell it all in court. And unlike you, when I talk, people believe me. Because truth has a weight that lies can never match. Vex's face twisted with rage. You ruined my life, you little bitch. You scarred my hand. You cost me my position. Everything that happened to you, you brought on yourself. His hand was moving toward his gun again, slowly, thinking nobody would notice. But Dakota noticed everything. The only thing Marlena brought on herself was survival, Dakota said quietly. And the strength to protect others from men like you. You want to talk about Ayana now? My sister? The 16-year-old Comanche girl you and your men took from her family 6 years ago? The girl you beat and raped and killed and threw in a ditch like garbage? Dutch told us everything an hour ago. He said you laughed about it afterward. Said she fought too hard, so you had to break her. Want to talk about that, Vex? Want to explain to this room full of people why you thought one girl's life was worth less than your entertainment? The room went absolutely silent. Even the breathing seemed to stop. Vex's hand froze inches from his gun. The saloon doors slammed open. Sheriff Blackwood strode in with deputies flanking him, guns drawn. Marcus Vex, you're under arrest for kidnapping, human trafficking, rape and murder. Put your hands up. Now. For a heartbeat, Vex stood frozen. Then his face contorted with fury and desperation. He went for his gun in a last, stupid attempt at escape. 3 things happened simultaneously. Dakota's rifle cracked. Marlena's revolver barked. A deputy's shotgun roared. Marcus Vex staggered backward, blood blooming across his chest in 3 places. He crashed into the table, cards scattering, then slid to the floor. His yellow smile was gone. His eyes stared at nothing. The man who'd terrorized Fort Hollow for years bled out on a saloon floor in less than a minute. Nobody moved to help him. Nobody called for a doctor. Everyone just watched as Marcus Vex's breathing stuttered and stopped. Marlena lowered her gun. She felt nothing. No satisfaction, no grief, just a quiet sense of completion, like closing a book after the last page. It was over. Finally, it was over. Sheriff Blackwood checked Vex's body, then nodded to his deputies. Self-defense. He drew first. Everyone here witnessed it. The men in the saloon nodded agreement. The bartender actually smiled. Blackwood turned to Marlena and Dakota. There'll be an inquest, but it's a formality. Vex was resisting arrest and reaching for his weapon. The shooting was justified. He paused. For what it's worth, you did Fort Hollow a service. Maybe now we can start cleaning up the rot that's been poisoning this town. Marlena holstered her gun. What about Redding? Blackwood's face hardened. He's already in custody. When he heard about the Line Shack raid, he tried to run. We caught him 5 miles south with saddlebags full of gold and documents detailing every transaction he made with Calderon over the past 5 years. He's going to prison for a long time. His ranch is being seized by the territory. Everything he built with blood money is gone. Marlena nodded. Justice. Real justice. Not perfect, but real. She looked at Dakota and saw the same exhausted relief on his face. They'd done what they came to do. Ayanna could rest. Verity could rest. All the stolen girls could rest. The work was finished. They walked out of the Golden Mare together into the cool night air. Behind them, the saloon slowly came back to life, voices rising in excited conversation about what they'd witnessed. Tomorrow, the story would spread across the territory. The woman called Too Fierce to Love, and the Comanche warrior who'd brought down Marcus Vex and his trafficking empire. But tonight, Marlena just wanted silence and stars and the knowledge that she'd survived. She'd done more than survive. She'd protected others. She'd made a difference. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Dakota walked beside her without speaking, his presence steady and solid. When they reached the edge of town where their horses waited, he finally said, "What will you do now? Where will you go?" Marlena looked at the stars scattered across the black sky like diamonds on velvet. She thought about her father and sister. She thought about all the years spent being fierce because she was too afraid to be anything else. And she realized something fundamental had changed. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was free. "I don't know," she said honestly. "For the first time in my life, I get to choose. What about you?" Dakota smiled. "I was thinking I might stay in the territory for a while. Make sure those girls get home safely. Make sure Redding's trial happens properly. Could use someone who knows Fort Hollow to help with that." He paused. "If you're interested." Marlena smiled back. "I'm interested." They mounted their horses and rode toward the mission ruins together. Two warriors who'd found something worth fighting for. And maybe, in time, something worth living for too. 3 months later, Marlena stood on the ridge overlooking the valley where her father's farm used to be. The land had been reclaimed by the territory after Redding's conviction and was being redistributed to families who'd lost property to his schemes. Marlena had been offered first claim, recognition for her role in bringing down the trafficking ring. She'd accepted, not because she wanted to farm, but because reclaiming this land felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. The girl who'd been Marley once. The girl who'd loved wildflowers and her sister's laugh and believed the world could be good. That girl wasn't entirely gone. She'd just been buried under years of survival and violence. Now, with Marcus Vex dead and justice served, Marlena could finally start excavating the pieces of herself she'd thought were lost forever. It was slow work, healing. Some days she still woke up expecting chains, but other days, increasingly, she woke up feeling something close to peace. Dakota had stayed, just as he'd promised. He'd helped the 4 rescued girls return to their families, traveling with Mika all the way to her Comanche village 3 days north. The reunion had made grown warriors weep. Dakota had also testified at Cornelius Redding's trial. His testimony about Ayanna's death finally entered into official record. Redding had been sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison. Dutch and Sam had received 15 years each in exchange for their cooperation. The Mexican trader, Calderon, had been arrested at the border and extradited back to face charges. The trafficking network that had poisoned Fort Hollow for years was completely dismantled. Justice hadn't brought Ayanna back, but it had prevented countless other girls from suffering her fate. That mattered. Dakota said it was enough. Marlena believed him most days. Other days, she knew the ghosts would always be there, but at least now they were quiet ghosts, peaceful ones. The screaming had stopped. The town of Fort Hollow had changed too. Sheriff Blackwood had cleaned house, firing deputies who'd been on Redding's payroll and replacing them with honest men. Rosa had been elected to the new town council, the first woman to hold any official position in Fort Hollow's history. She used her influence to establish a shelter for women and girls escaping violence, funded by the sale of Redding's seized assets. Jimmy had left town as planned, heading to California with enough money to start a stable and blacksmith business. He wrote letters every month, telling Marlena about his new life, thanking her for giving him the courage to escape. Marlena kept those letters in a wooden box her father had made. On hard days, she read them and remembered that sometimes people really did get second chances. Sometimes the story didn't have to end in tragedy. Sometimes fierce women survived and built something good from the ashes of everything they lost. Marlena wasn't called Too Fierce to Love anymore. The name had died with Marcus Vex. Now people called her Marlena, or Miss Coltrane, or sometimes just smiled and nodded when she passed. She'd opened a small business teaching women and girls to shoot, ride, and defend themselves. The classes were popular. Fort Hollow had learned the hard way what happened when women couldn't protect themselves or each other. Marlena taught them to aim true, speak loud, and never apologize for being strong. She taught them that fierce wasn't the opposite of loving. Sometimes fierce was the purest form of love there was. Protecting yourself and others wasn't masculine or unfeminine or too much. It was human. It was necessary. And it was something every woman deserved to know how to do. The young girls who came to her classes looked at her with admiration instead of fear. That felt strange and wonderful and healing all at once. Dakota built a cabin on the ridge above Marlena's reclaimed farm. He said it was because the hunting was good in the hills and he liked having a view of the valley. Marlena knew it was really because he wanted to be close enough to help if she needed him, but far enough away to give her space to heal on her own terms. They spent evenings together, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in companionable silence while the sun set. They never spoke about love or future plans or what they were to each other. The labels didn't matter. What mattered was that they understood each other completely. Two broken people who'd found wholeness not through romance or rescue, but through shared purpose and mutual respect. They were partners, warriors, friends. Maybe someday they'd be more, or maybe this was enough. Marlena didn't worry about it. For the first time in her life, she was content to let the future unfold naturally instead of trying to control every outcome through sheer force of will. One evening, as they sat on Marlena's porch watching the stars emerge, Dakota said quietly, "You know what I realized? They called you too fierce to love, because they didn't understand that fierce women love harder and more loyally than anyone else. They love so fiercely they'd kill to protect what matters. They love so deeply they'd rather die than see the people they care about hurt. Fierce isn't the opposite of loving. It's the proof of it." Marlena felt tears prick her eyes, happy tears for once. My father used to say something similar. He said strength and gentleness weren't opposites. He said the strongest people were the ones gentle enough to care about others, despite everything the world did to harden them. She looked at Dakota. "You're like that too, you know, fierce and gentle simultaneously. It's why we work together. We understand that you can be both." Dakota nodded. Ayana understood that too. She was the gentlest person I knew. But when our village was attacked once, she fought like a warrior to protect the younger children. Gentle people can be fierce when they need to be. And fierce people can be gentle when it's safe to be. He paused. "You're safe now, Marlena. You don't have to be fierce every second anymore. You can rest. You earned it." Marlena let those words sink into her bones. Safe. She was safe. The chains were gone. The threats were gone. Marcus Vex was gone. For the first time since she was 14 years old, nobody was trying to hurt her or take from her or break her. She could breathe without waiting for the next blow. She could sleep without nightmares. She could exist without armor. The realization made her weep. Deep cleansing sobs that shook her whole body. Dakota didn't try to stop her or comfort her with empty words. He just moved closer and let her cry against his shoulder, his presence steady and sure. This was healing, the ugly, painful kind that hurt worse than the original wound, but left you cleaner on the other side. Marlena cried for her lost family, her stolen childhood, all the years spent being fierce because soft meant broken. She cried until the tears ran dry, and the stars were bright overhead, and the cool night air felt like a blessing on her hot face. When she finally pulled back, Dakota smiled at her with such understanding that fresh tears threatened. "You're going to be okay," he said. "We both are." The story could end here, with two broken warriors finding peace on a ridge in the Western Territories. But stories don't really end. They just pause before the next chapter begins. Marlena Coltrane would continue teaching women to be fierce and gentle simultaneously. Dakota would continue hunting in the hills and protecting the valley. Together, they'd build something that looked like family, not through blood or romance, but through choice and respect and shared survival. Other women would hear about what happened in Fort Hollow and find hope in knowing that even the fiercest among them could still find peace. Other men would learn from Dakota that true strength meant protecting the vulnerable instead of exploiting them. The ripples of what they'd done would spread far beyond one small town in the territories. And years later, when people told the story of how Marcus Vex's trafficking empire fell, they'd say it was brought down by a woman called Too Fierce to Love and a Comanche warrior who saw her truth. But those who really knew would understand. It was brought down by a woman fierce enough to love justice more than revenge, and a man gentle enough to see strength as protection instead of domination. They'd understand that the real victory wasn't in Vex's death, but in Marlena's survival, in her choosing to live instead of just exist, in her proving that fierce women don't need to be loved. They need to be respected, supported, and given space to be both strong and soft as they choose. That was the lesson. That was the truth. And that was the story worth telling. Marlena stood from the porch and walked to the edge of her land, looking out over the valley in the starlight. Somewhere out there, her father and sister rested. Somewhere, Ayana's spirit was finally at peace. And here, on this reclaimed soil, Marlena Coltrane was finally, truly free. Not because a man had saved her, she'd saved herself. Not because she'd become less fierce, she'd simply learned that fierce could coexist with joy. She'd learned that survival wasn't the same as living. And she'd learned that sometimes the women who are called too much, too fierce, too strong, too independent, too loud, are actually exactly enough. They're the ones who change the world because they refuse to be broken by it. Marlena smiled at the stars, at the valley, at the life stretching before her with possibility instead of threat. They'd called her too fierce to love. They'd been wrong. She was fierce enough to love herself, to love justice, to love the idea of a better world. And that kind of love, that fierce, unconditional, world-changing love, that was the most powerful force there was. Marcus Vex had tried to break it. He'd failed. And in the end, fierce love had won. It always did. It always would. The story was finished, but Marlena's life was just beginning. And this time, she got to write it herself.